Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials.
Hey, Engagers, and today we have Roman Rackwitz. Roman, did I pronounce that right before?
Yeah, Roman Rackwitz, so that's perfect.
Roman, are you prepared to engage?
Sure, let's get ready to rumble.
Let's do this. So Roman is the founder of Engaging Lab GmbH, Europe's first gamification agency in 2009. He was the winner of the first International Gamification Challenge, which was done by Mashable and SETI in 2011. He teaches gamification for HR and marketing at universities in Germany and Switzerland. In 2017, he also founded a social media agency that uses the knowledge and experience from Engaging Lab to help customers targeting long-term relationships, mainly in B2B. He's also the program director for the gamification track at the Gamescom Congress and co-host of the Gamification Day. He is regularly featured in German television and print as a guest when gamification is a topic. He also has a podcast. He's a co-host of the German gamification podcast, Spiel aber Ernst. I'm sure I didn't get that right. And he is also a member of the board of directors of the Schultheiss Software AG. Roman, is there anything that we missed? Anything you want to add from that intro?
No, I think that's perfect. Thanks for the introduction.
Quite integral.
Yeah.
So, Roman, the first thing that we like to do with our guests is to get to know you a little bit better. And for that, we ask you about what would a regular day with Roman look like?
So right now, my regular day is starting with my little son. So I'm picking up, and so we are I'm bringing him to the kindergarten. And so my normal workday starts around 9 a.m. because of that delay. And so it depends on what's on the schedule, of course. Yeah. So as you already said, we have a gamification podcast, and often we do other stuff of media content. So most often we start the day with sitting together and talking about, okay, what is the content we want to deliver today? What kind of guests do we have in our show or a podcast or video or whatever? This is one part. On the other side, of course, we still have our customer projects. Yeah? So the point is always, okay, how far are we? Are we still on track? What changed over the last few days, weeks, whatever? Yeah? Often customers change their mind also. So the context is changing, and so we have to adapt. And then, of course, there's also the research part that we are doing. And the research part is not just about gamification. So mostly we are talking more about behavior psychology stuff. This kind of things that I really like. And I'm to be honest, I think that this is something that the gamification industry lacks a lot, unfortunately. And so normally this is what we're doing till lunchtime, and then in the afternoon we go to the production part. So if we are trying to execute the content that we delivered or that we want to deliver, that we planned so far. And or we have the customers meetings. We are working on the concepts. We are, of course, cooperating with the companies that help us to create the actual. For example, if we need a digital application to deliver our gamification concept, or that we want to implement inside of the customer's place, so then we have to collaborate with the company, with the agency that's actually coding the stuff. And and probably, good question, probably around 40% of my time, or 40% of my time is still about being on conferences, talking about the topic, evangelizing, educating people about the idea behind gamification, the science behind fun, or behind gamification, and still trying to help to grow the industry.
That makes a lot of sense, and I guess that everybody wins when there's people trying to grow the industry like yourself. I was, to be honest, when I was first thinking of starting a podcast, I got very excited when I saw that you had a podcast on gamification, and then my excitement went down with the fact that I didn't know how to speak German. And I couldn't listen to your podcast. I mean, I could listen to it, but I wouldn't be able to understand it. But that's fantastic, and I think it's a very nice way to progress the industry, especially in the German-speaking countries, having your podcast, which is very localized in that sense.
Yeah, that was the idea. So when I started in 2009 with gamification, so as a business, in the beginning, all I did was in English, and then over time, I think it was around 2013, 14, probably more 14. I decided to focus much more on the German-speaking countries for two reasons. One thing is that gamification is a lot of psychology stuff, and so of course we have different kind of cultures in the German-speaking countries than in Asia or the US or whatever. And so I think if you want to, so I think there's a good way. Of course, you can deliver gamification consultancy internationally. But what I wanted to do in addition is to be the number one expert for the German-speaking countries because of their culture. So to know exactly what kind of mechanics are really working here in these kind of cultures, how are companies organized, how are organizations ruled by law, by management, so that, of course, you're becoming better and more successful in implementing, executing, and also maintaining the programs at the end. And so that's the first reason. And the second reason, of course, was something like branding. So to be honest, all the other gamification people that I know that do that for a living or really focusing on gamification are not from Germany, not German speaking. So it's internationally. And so of course I thought, okay, it's great to be around internationally and traveling and working a lot, but for me in the long term to create and to build up a sustainable business, number one rule for me has to be that in the German-speaking countries, I want to be number one, or I want to be to create my brand here. And this is why I started to focus mainly on German-speaking countries, and so of course also on, content in German.
This was something, and I'm going a bit off topic here, but this was something that I was thinking about because I'm from Latin America, but I live in Spain, as you probably know. And it was a decision for me whether starting the podcast in Spanish or going for English. For me, the tipping point was the fact that, completely like in the other direction of what you were saying, because I wanted to do an interview podcast. I love to meet very interesting people like you in a podcast. So, of course, doing it in English opened me a bit more to a larger guest.
Sure.
Larger guest, but it's still something that goes in the back of my mind whether I should do something as well in Spanish. But you're inspiring me right here, right now, Roman.
I think it depends on your goals. So what you said right now is totally right. Yeah, I think if it's really about creating a podcast and trying to educate the industry or to get as much people as possible and to talk to, and also of course to broaden the audience. Of course, English would be the better way. And then it depends on another thing. If you want to make more deep dive stuff, for example, that's, and when we're talking about gamification, so we are really talking about psychology stuff a lot. So for example, cultural boundaries and so on. So if you want to go more into the, for example, I could imagine into the how to apply the concepts, how to apply ideas to particular contexts. And then, for example, and then, of course, you want to use examples like particular companies or problems that the companies have. Then it could make sense that you start to a region, and then still, the interesting thing is it's just in the beginning, so that you focus on a particular country, language, or as I say, core market. But at the end, what I experience right now is that even if I'm producing mostly all my stuff in German, of course, nowadays, a lot of people are translating it via Google Translate.
Yes.
I just got a message a few weeks ago from a girl from Africa, and she's translating a lot of my stuff in French. And now she's creating a website with my stuff in French. And so just doing it in German is not a real problem anymore. This is one thing. So the boundaries for others, for other languages are going down to listen to German content. And of course, that's true for every kind of language. And the other thing is that, and this is really funny, that a lot of companies internationally are coming to me and they say, hey, if you can execute and if you can do gamification in Germany with probably you can do it all everywhere. Yeah, no problem.
Those serious Germans are
Exactly.
Definitely the hardest market.
Yeah, that's what the people think, and of course there was a reason why I'm always also focusing on the German market, because I think it's hard to get, but it's easier to keep, I think, because sometimes someday when you have a client in Germany, it's not like, let's say, more in the US where companies are very easy in trying something out, trying new things, and then they try it out, and then there's something new coming, and then they jump over and try this one. So in Germany, once you have your brand, once you have your companies, your customers, and there is some kind of, let's say, methodology or topic that has its place in our culture, it stays there for a longer time. So I think if it's about the sustainable part, that makes sense. And another reason, of course, is why people are thinking that if you can do it in Germany, you can do it everywhere. Is, for example, is about our laws or our unions. Yeah? So if you can handle the unions inside the organizations, or if you can handle gamification, even if we have these, or also that we have these data security laws that are very strict. It can't. The only thing that is that's happening in another country is that it's easier.
That's fantastic. And now I want to make a shift, Roman, from all that success that you were having, and I know you're collecting a lot of it. But I want to go to a different time, a time when you ran into what I would like to call your favorite failure, a time when somebody went wrong and it led you perhaps to a greater learning, or even led you to future success. Can you tell us that story, Roman? You don't have to name any names. Nobody has to feel bad about it.
No, it's totally fine. I think I'm also teaching entrepreneurship, and I love to be an entrepreneur, and so it's all about failure. So that's only progress, so no problem with that. And I think the best example that I can give here is, at the same time, like you have said it in the ad, also my biggest success. It became my biggest success later, and it was a company. It's also located here in Germany and here in Munich. And it's a company that wanted to create software for restaurants. So they wanted to target the problems of high fluctuation of employees, how to help them to get more self-educated, and how to create an environment that makes it easier for them to collaborate, and all this kind of stuff. And so the biggest advantage in the first part was that I'm doing gamification for over 10 years now, and this is up to today, until today, it's the only customer that I have that has not already created some kind of project or product or service, and then is approaching me and says, hey, we have done that, now please add something fun to that, or add a layer of gamification to that. That's always a problem and always difficult, because to be honest, a broken or a very boring activity gamified is most often still boring. Yeah, so it's really you have to create the activity from its core in a more engaging way. And so this software company, asked me before they even started to create the software, and so we could really build the whole software around the concept of gamification, and that was an amazing starting point for me. And then so I really got deep into the stuff. I was at the restaurants that already confirmed that they will be with us from the beginning, so they will do the beta testing and everything. So I was with them, I worked with them, I walked with them, and with the people there. And then so we created the gamification concept, totally focused on the waiters and on the barkeepers and on the shift managers. I don't know how to say that. Yep. Yeah, it's right. Okay, and so we introduced that, we implemented it. So it was like a reverse engineering part. So it's so we did MVP. We put it out. We learned. We adjusted, and it's like an agile development. And so I was very proud about the concept because I really focused only on intrinsic gamification. So all my philosophy in gamification is against extrinsic motivation, so against points and badges as a reward, against leaderboards, because I really believe that if you create a great activity, you don't need that stuff anymore. Of course, you can use points as some kind of feedback system or currency or whatever, but it's never the reward at the end for doing something. And so I was really proud about that. And then we implemented the full version, and so my job was done. And after 1 or 2 months, I came back to the company and we looked at the data. So they of course, they have an analytic department and they are looking at the data all the time. And then they called me and said, okay, we have to talk. And there we saw that the data or the let's say the usage of the software by the people were very bad. Okay, so they used it once, they didn't come back, the engagement was not really deep. And so, of course, that was some kind of little shock, or question, okay, what happened? And so from that point of view, you could say, okay, it was a failure. Okay, the company invested a lot. It has its customers, restaurant chains. Yeah, so they implemented it and it didn't work out. So what we found out later by again, going into the restaurants, talking with the people, we recognized that I only built the system for the people who are involved, who should be using the software. But of course, you have a management part also. And so at the end, the managers of the restaurants or of the companies have to decide different kind of things that rely on the behavior of the people who are involved in the gamification software. So if you just focus on the people who are really using the software and that are the target group, but you forget about the management at the end. Yeah? And of course, the people who are involved in your software, who should use your software, they have to communicate to the management. They have to match KPIs from the management. The management, again, has to decide, looking at the KPIs, what to do and what not. And so if you only introduce the software for the people on the floor, but you don't connect it with the working tools and with the management structure and process hierarchies and so on of the restaurants or of the company itself, it's broken. Okay, so and my customer, so the company who created the software at the end, they did an amazing job in going back and in building something else that they call a cockpit, and the cockpit is something like the
the pilots of the airplanes are driving, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thinking behind that, and it's like what my customer managed was that they were able to use the cockpit to translate all the data and the results and the behavior that happened in the software that I created, the gamification software, and match it or connect it with the actual management software that was already in place at the restaurants. They even, for example, I mean, you do a lot of interviews with gamification. So I'm pretty sure everyone is talking about the flow, okay? So, yeah, we want to achieve the flow. We want to get near to the flow. Everyone knows a little bit about, okay, how can you create or how can you build a framework that makes it easier to get into the direction of the flow for the user, whatever. But on the other side, the point is, how can management use this abstract thinking of flow to do real decisions that are relying on KPIs. Yes. So normally that's really difficult. And so if you say, hey, we are creating a more flow-like environment, or now the people are much more engaged, yeah, so what? Okay, management could say, hey, that's nice, but what can I do with that? Okay, how can I mirror that behavior into my data? How to use that and of course the management itself has to report to the upper management again, and so on. And so this is something that my customer managed pretty well. They created this kind of cockpit system, and I had an amazing learning about that. Yeah, because so far I was only focused on the gamification part. But of course, I'm implementing that always in an environment that's already there, and that's working. And so what I'm implementing has to be connected to all the other different kind of context, all the other environment that's happening in a company, so that every guy, every person who's making decisions out of that, can use my system in a, let's say, countable or measuring in a way where he can use the data and he can analyze it, and it makes sense to him also.
Absolutely. And those are what I like to call as well the gatekeepers. What you have to take into consideration.
Totally right.
Not only the people who will use it, but the people who will decide that those people will actually use it. And that can be the top management at some point. That can be the principal of your school. That can be the middle management as well, because they say, well, this is fantastic, but I need these people to work more time instead of doing these gamification things. And they don't encourage it. If they don't encourage it, well, then you're kind of screwed, because if people don't use it, they're not going to get the benefits. So taking into account the gatekeepers is fundamental.
Exactly. You have to take that into account. And it doesn't make sense, even if you create the best software for the people who should use that, even if the waiter said, hey, that's the most fun and engaging software, or now my job suddenly is really fun. But if it doesn't match with all the other things that they have to do, to talk, to think about while they are doing their work, of course, they won't use the software, because it doesn't make sense. At the end, even if it's more fun, if it doesn't help them to achieve better results concerning the management, or so that the management can recognize it and acknowledge it and benefit it from it, and or whatever, it doesn't make sense to use it from the waiter point of view. And so so I had an amazing learning. My customer did an amazing job, and they built the software, the cockpit and everything else, but they keep me up to date. I can always go into their office, and then I get my updates, and I'm learning a lot how they solved that kind of issue, and they really solved it successfully. So right now, McDonald's, for example, is using the software in its first stores in Germany. And of course, they want to use it worldwide at the end, if they can roll it out, if it makes sense. And the thing is that they like the idea of the gamification concept. We showed that to them, and they of course think, okay, it's the right way for our customers. But to be honest, at the end, the decision to use the software, to buy it, I think the cockpit was the one, let's say, little trigger that at the end said, okay, now it's not just that, it's something, now we can implement it. It makes sense. We can connect it to our own data. We get some kind of KPIs that we can use to make further decisions if we want to keep the software in the long term or not. And
that's fantastic. Because that's what makes it make sense for them. And it sounds like it was a massive and still continues to be a massive success in the end.
So far, it's pretty good. Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. So, Roman, the next question that we would like to move in now is I can see some strokes of what your process might look like. But can you run us through what kind of process do you do when you're creating a gamified solution for your clients? What are maybe the steps that you take when you're creating these solutions?
So in the beginning, first of all, we are always asking the customer 3 questions. So the first question is it learnable? So the thing is, if you want to gamify an activity, it has to be learnable, where you can become better, where you can achieve progress. Okay, because if you think about it, games, sports, hobbies, so everything that we are doing voluntarily has to be is defined by a challenge that you have to overcome. And you want a problem that you have to solve, and you have to solve it by your own strategy, how you use resources, what kind of skills you're developing, and so on. And so, to be honest, even if most of the demand for gamification right now is coming from often from industries where they want to gamify really, really repetitive and boring tasks. The point is, I think if you have a task at place that's only repetitive and where there's only one perfect way to solve it, so the most efficient way, I don't think that you can gamify it. You can make it perhaps a little bit more entertaining, but most often that's distracting at the same time, and that's not following the 100% efficiency rule. And so the first question is always, is it learnable? So do we have an activity that's more depending on the brain than on a repetitive mechanical task? Okay, that's the first thing. Because, the number one rule for me, my gamification philosophy is that in games, I always say in games, humans are chasing their better selves. So they have to have the opportunity to become better, to learn, to fail, and to start over, and to progress. And if you always have to do the same thing all the day, all the time, and there's only one right way to do that, there is no way to progress. No chance. Yeah. The second question is it measurable? And this is something that we, of course, have to fight a lot in Germany, especially because you need to measure everything. Games are pure measure engines. They measure everything. If you fail, if you succeed, what you do, what kind of strategy you choose, what kind of resources you choose, in what kind of way, and so on. Only if you can measure that, and if you are also able to provide the feedback for the people to be able to learn, to see the consequences of their doing, like in a game. And this is also the third question that we're asking: can we provide individual feedback to every individual user? And if our customer answers all these questions with yes, then we can start to think about a gamification concept. If he answers one question with no, then we have to think about, okay, what can we do to perhaps change the answer from a no to a yes? And for the rest, so
this is like a screening, like a pre-screening. Exactly. Before getting started, you want to make sure it's possible to do something with them.
Exactly. I don't want my customers to waste time, and I don't want us to waste time for a project where at the end they think should gamify it, but at the end the only way to do something is to create a reward system for it. Yeah. So if you have a repetitive task, like if you're working on a production line, you can create something that's a little bit more motivating, perhaps, and that's normally a reward system. If you do that, you will get that. But this is extrinsic motivating, and so from my point of view, that's not gamification. And so when we see that customers want to do that, then I suggest other agencies. So exactly, and then what we have created over the last, let's say, 5-6 years is something that I call the periodic table of gamification. And so all what we have learned over time, the structures that we are using, the methodology that we are using, the mechanics that we are using, we have implemented we have tried to visualize and implement into one periodic table, like the periodic table of chemicals. And so this is now some kind of, let's say, framework that we use internally to have some kind of roadmap where we get started. What are the first questions we ask? What are the first conditions that we have to work on so that we can provide the right environment for a gamified system to be implemented? Then how to create the system itself, the gamified concept itself. And then we have also some kind of let's say compass. That's our internal rule book. So we have created right now there are 7 main rules, as to say, and these rules are some kind of compass for ourselves, always to check when we are creating a concept. Are we still on track? Are we violating some ethics status that we have set for ourselves? Or also are we this is the main part of the compass for me, for example, is it helps us to, let's say, to be always focused on the long run. Because sometimes you have great mechanics that you can use right now, and they would be very useful for a short term of time to motivating someone, or to create a new mission, or to create a new collaboration, or to create a new behavior, let's say this way. But often, if you're just successful in the short term, but it's violating the rules of our, let's say, long-term living organism. And so and this is the compass that we've created, and this is all integrated all together into this kind of periodic table of gamification. I even have described it and published it, not in its full depth, but in a way that I hope that that the reader can get an idea about what we are doing there, and you can find it on the engaginglab.com website.
Fantastic. So that the listeners can also get a broader picture of what you were explaining.
Yeah.
So now, Roman, we're going to move into what I call the second part of the interview, where we go from these story and long-winded answers into something that's a bit more sort of rapid fire.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you questions which tend to be something that you can answer in less than a minute normally.
Yeah.
So the first one is, if there's one thing that you could say is like a best practice or something that almost any gamification project could benefit from, what would that be?
For me, number one is if you don't stop focusing on results, also not being result focused, but activity focused. Most gamification projects all are result focused. That means they tell you what you have to achieve or what's the goal. And then, of course, at the end, so you're trying to get the goal or you get the result, and then you get some kind of feedback, reward, or whatever. The point is that if you focus, if you tell someone that this is the goal or another thing is the goal or whatever, you create a game inside the brain of the user where he's only focused on the result at the end. And so that's totally naturally that you're always trying to achieve the result in the least so in a way that where you have to use the least amount of resources or whatever, the easiest way. Yeah. That's natural. So if you say here is the problem and this is the result that we want to have, you're creating that game inside the brain of the users. They can't avoid it, no chance. And what that also means, of course, is that they're not focused on the activity anymore, and so you're not solving the problem of a boring activity. The science behind that is there's a guy who's called Peter Sapolsky, and he did a lot of research about all these reward-driven chemicals inside of our brain, like, for example, dopamine and all the others. And so science knows for a long time that the rewards of dopamine, for example, you're achieving dopamine not when you're getting the reward at the end, but in anticipation of the reward.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think from my point of view, to be honest, if you look at gamification projects, 90% of them are only focused on the results, and they are all built on the belief that the people are being motivated by a reward.
So how would it look like to focus from that into the activity? What would you like very quickly say? How do you shift from one to the other?
I think there are two easy rules. The first rule is you never communicate a reward. If you give something at the end, do it by chance, do it suddenly without communicating it. And don't let the people know what they have to do to get the reward. Yeah. So I told you about the restaurant software. Even there we have badges because the restaurant managers really like that stuff. And I wanted to avoid it, but they wanted me to build it into the system. And so what I did is I created badges that you can earn if you do different combinations of behaviors. So it's not really easy to find out why did you get that kind of badge. And you never know how many badges are there, what are you getting them for, and how far are you away to earn them or to lose them. The interesting thing is that because of that condition, people can't start to think about the result because they have no idea. What do they have to do to get the badge, or how far are they still away to get the badge? But on the other day, it creates some kind of discovery mode, okay? Because suddenly they have the badge in the system, in the dashboard. Then they go to another guy and say, hey, do you know the badge? And it's called, I don't know, Beer Master. So, okay, probably we got it because we sold a lot of beer. Okay, do you have it too? No, I don't have it. I have the Cake Master. Okay, how do you get that? Or what? And so the people are starting to talk to each other and to try to find out how to get it, how to lose it, and so on. And so it creates some kind of more excitement around a badge. Yeah, but they are not really focused on the result. That's the first thing. And the second thing is really, really, really focus on personal progress of every person. So what I like to do always is I really hate competition. I think it's a totally misunderstanding that the human being is motivated by competition. What competition does in a very good way is that it helps you to compare yourself to others. Okay, but this is what we really like, because it makes it easier for us to find out if our own performance is good or bad. Because, but it's not about because we want to win over others. That's a totally different thing. But what I really like to build into my systems is the competition against yourself, your former self. And by doing that, by showing the people, because of the dashboard, because of data, what they did yesterday and how they do today, for example, they can see, did they progress in a way that's important for them or not? And so they are because there is no result at the end, there is no reward at the end, there's only the progress or or not a progress, whatever, from your yesterday ego, for example, so from your former self. This is when people start to focus on the activity much more.
That makes a lot of sense, and thank you for that, Roman. The next question would be, what is your favorite game?
Video game or board game?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay, let me take both. Board game it's the Settler of Catan.
Okay.
And video game, it's still Command and Conquer. This is the game I grew up with in a boarding school. And yeah, so it's still my favorite one.
Yeah, classics are sticky for sure.
Yeah.
Roman, is there somebody that you would like to listen to interviewed in a podcast like Professor Game?
Oh, sure. I think that... Do you know Sir Ken Robinson?
Nope, I don't.
He has done one of the most famous TED Talks, and he has written books and giving a lot of talks, and he talks a lot about how the human being learns. And I think that despite all the stuff about game design, the visuals, the storytelling and whatever, at the end, every game is about learning. And so I think that if the gamification industry really would become better in knowing about how the human being learns, how do you create curiosity, for example, to find out solutions, and so on, and how to help people to progress within their own learning curve. I think if people would know more about that, they would natively create better gamification solutions.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense then as well. We tend to focus a lot on learning and education in this podcast, so that would make even more sense to have this person. If you have any contact with him, I'll ask you at the end of the interview to see if we can have him relatively soon enough.
Okay, cool.
So Roman, what book would you, if there was one book that you would like to recommend to the engagers, what book would that be and why?
So I think I will skip all the obvious books that are most often recommended in the gamification industry, like, for example, Reality is Broken. No, I think my number one book would be The Theory of Fun from Ralph Koster.
Ralph Koster, yeah. That's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
Really. Yeah.
What would you say is your superpower, your sweet spot in designing gamification?
I don't know if other people think that's a superpower or if it makes sense, but for me, I think all of our gamification concepts have a chance or are in one way or another more or less successful. I think because we rely or we focus so heavily on the personal progress of every single person. Yeah, so it's always about chase your better self, and it's not about, as I already said, get some kind of points reward, extrinsic reward, or competition against others, and so on.
So you're very, very focused on the intrinsic rewards, so to speak.
Totally. I think, to be honest, all the extrinsic stuff, we already have that in place for, 150 years now. We have created amazing, successful extrinsic reward programs, like all the loyalty programs and all the incentive programs and so on. So we have already done that, and it doesn't work anymore so good as it used to be. So now, because of that, people are looking around for new possibilities to help people to stay motivated or to become motivated or whatever. So why should we go back and do the same thing again, offering extrinsic rewards now just in a digital way? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's it. So Roman, we're running out of time, so I would like to know if you have any final piece of advice for the engagers, if there's anything else you would like to tell them. And I always like to gear it because there's especially an important group of people in our listeners that are maybe starting gamification or like seriously thinking about it, but haven't taken that first step. Is there any advice that you would give for this kind of profiles of people?
Yeah, so if someone wants to get started, I really would recommend to focus much more on the behavior psychology area in the first place. Positive psychology, behavior psychology, also neuroscience, how our brain is working, how all the chemicals are working there, because it makes a lot of sense to understand why do we like learning. But of course, the book that I already recommended, The Theory of Fun of Ralph Costa, would be a great start for that. And that's actually I would always recommend if someone wants to get started into thinking. And the second part is what's always fascinating is if you let people design a game in a workshop or in a group, they make it natively not so bad. Okay, they create the first level, and then if you tell them, okay, now create a second level, they already know natively how to make it a little bit more challenging. But suddenly, if you say, okay, now do it in a business context, they seem to lose this kind of native possibility to design games, and suddenly think, okay, now the human being is a homo economicus, and he's only being motivated by incentives and bonus and money and rewards, and not by challenge anymore. Like they already did it in games when they created the second level, for example. There they know that it's about the challenge that keeps you playing. And this is why I really think is the best exercise, or an interesting exercise, is always sit down with your family, take the most favorite board game that you're playing, for example, and just change the rules and try to figure out how that works. Perhaps we did it sometimes. And when we change the rules, sometimes suddenly my mother, for example, doesn't want to play anymore with us because it's not fun anymore. But my dad and myself, for example, we enjoy it even better. And so you get a lot of learning out of that.
Yeah. That's great advice. So finally, Roman, can you tell us how can we connect with you if you have anything else going on that you would like to let the audience know, and then we'll say it's game over.
I think it's pretty easy to find me on the web. So if you look for Roman Rackwitz Gamification, you have my website, you have the company website, you have a lot of different social profiles. Of course, everyone can feel free or should feel free to get in touch with me. There's my email address, roman@engaginglab.com. Feel free to write me. And so far, I think it would be pretty difficult not to find me.
We sure will. If anybody has a hard time finding your last name, you can just type Roman in the search bar in professorgame.com, and we'll find your
Awesome.
last name very, very easily.
Thanks.
So thank you very much for your time, Roman. I know you have a very tight schedule. I know you were recently in Africa and will be back to Africa again. So thanks for making a spot for us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And it's time to say game over.
Game over.
Engagers, it's fantastic to have you around. This podcast, it only makes sense because we have you, the engagers. So let's connect on Twitter. And that way you can let me know if you have any questions that you would like to ask. If you have any questions that you would not like asked anymore, or if there's somebody you would like to have as a guest on Professor Game, or any feedback, anything you would like of this show, of Professor Game in general. So my Twitter account is @RobAlvarezB. Let's get the conversation started. I'm always sharing content on gamification and especially about education. But hey, don't click continue yet. Do you want to know about the creation of virtual worlds? About the whys when you wanted to create a game or gamification from an expert, a professor like Richard Bartle? That guy, the creator of the 4 player types for massive multiplayer online games? Well, then you have to listen to him on the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!